Hi, my name is Russ. I lead an app dev specialist group inside of Google's professional services team, and we focus on how to help customers build applications using Looker. Today, we're going to take a look at what's new inside the Looker App Dev Toolkit. We're going to first have a conceptual overview, and then we'll be having a live demo, seeing how fast we can deliver something valuable. So stay tuned. To have good context on what's being released for app developers in 2020, we should rewind back to the last join. In the last join, we announced Looker 7.0, which was announced and shipped with enhanced iframe events, an Embed Sdk for handling iframes and convenience wrappers for those events. We provided dynamic dashboard control, allowing you to manipulate the dashboard at runtime. We also provided official support for server-side SDKs for the API and a whole lot more. So it was a really banner year for the app developer. So we'll take a look at what's new and enhanced in 2020 and how we can actually leverage some of what was announced at our previous join. All right, so what's new in 2020? Well, it's the extension framework. The extension framework, in short, is a plugin system inside of Looker that allows us to run third-party JavaScript entirely hosted within Looker. But that JavaScript runs on the client with privileged access to Looker's APIs. So you can run code as the logged-in user, retrieve data, perform admin functions, as well as call out to external services. And this introduces a lot of different use cases that we'll take a look at together. So put in other words, what's awesome about the extension framework is that its plugin system actually allows you to develop code, place it inside of your own LookML project, and serve it out to your users. And so in short, you can think of it as your code running against your data warehouse, and you're in total control of the user experience. I'm sure your users are going to love it. You don't have to look any further than what our partners are saying about it. People who have had early access to the extension framework really understand the power. Jawad, the CEO of Data Driven, recently said that he was amazed because the extension framework took what would have been a larger undertaking and allowed his developer to produce something really useful and meaningful in only a single day. And that's the power of the extension framework. So to really understand how we're making these engineering projects easier, we can take a look at these two different stacks. If you'd wanted to build a data application using Looker's iframe or API, and it was a brand new project, you'd have to think about creating a backend, a front end, and then you'd also have to think about how your users are going to be logged in and making sure that the state is consistent. That's not a problem ordinarily, but the extension framework on the right is able to radically simplify this because you already know that your users are logged in, and you can deploy the actual JavaScript on the Looker host. The result is that you can really just start developing what matters. And that means that you're going to have way higher engineering productivity if your requirements permit you to use the extension framework. All right, so let's take a quick summary of what we've learned. The extension framework allows us to reduce friction for developers because in certain kinds of projects, it can eliminate the need for outside infrastructure, allowing you to actually host your code inside of Looker and deploy straight to your users. And because it allows you to use the API and Embed SDKs within it, it allows you to take advantage of all the other elements of the platform. So why don't we go ahead and jump into a live demo, and we're going to learn a little bit about this hands-on.
All right. Let's get started. So imagine for this scenario that we've gotten requirements from higher ups that say we want to know our best customers, but they want to see it in a really engaging way. I think we can do that with an application, so let's give it a whirl. The first thing that we would do to get started is to register an application inside of the LookML project. So you can see here that we've called it join20. We've given it a label of hello world. And then this is the most important parameter. It's where the JavaScript lives. So for the purpose of development, we're going to be serving it from localhost. And so we'll look at the dev setup in just a moment, but it's going to serve it dynamically through the development process into our sandboxed iframe that hosts the extension code. Once you've developed it to your satisfaction, you can literally download the file, and then you could upload it into the Looker file system as you see here, and then you would just comment this, uncomment this, and then you'd be able to push to production. That's the deployment process. So what is this? You can also entitle your application to perform certain types of things, and this list is going to grow over time. We're going to be calling several API methods, and so I've listed them out here, and then these are several other entitlements that I've added. So you'll need to make sure that any API calls you're going to register with Looker need to be inside of this manifest. Okay, so that's the application directive. Let's go ahead and uncomment our development server. And one final note is that in order for this to show up in your browse menu, which is where we'll go to the application, it does need to have a model deployed to production. In this case, I've already committed the join20 model, and so that's why it shows up in my browse menu. So keep in mind that there must be a project with a model, and then once you do that, everything else can be done in dev mode. So next steps, we need to boot up localhost 8080 and serve a bundle file. Let's get started. How do I serve JavaScript into the extension framework? There's a couple of repos that can really help you get started. Our engineering team has published them in the Looker open source organization, and we've got some great examples. One here is Kitchen Sink, and the reason it's called that is because it gives a really good overview of all of the different capabilities inside the extension framework. We can see here, this is the code live, and so it gives examples of how we can actually call the Looker API, and then we can go and see the corresponding code samples that make that happen. So it's a great resource. There will be links to this in the join materials, so feel free to navigate to these afterward. Next, this is the example repo and template that we'll be using for our demo today. It's based entirely in React and does just a simple hello world, so it's great for getting started. Let's download the code, and I'll see you at the terminal. We're ready to clone our repo. CD into it. And now we're going to use our package manager to install all of the dependencies. So the example that we'll provide as part of this video comes with a lot of configurations and proper dependencies. So this is a perfect template for getting started, and then you can be up and running as fast as this. Okay, so this is actually booting the development server, serving our bundle.js file locally, as we had referred to it in the project manifest, and we're ready to go see what that looks like inside of Looker. Back inside of the application, I realized that we needed to include one more entitlement. We'll be using this me endpoint in the demo. Let me go ahead and save that. And because I had pushed the model to production earlier, we can now see our extension in the browse menu. So we'll see that hello world. Let's open it up. And this is a super simple example, but we're calling that me endpoint. It's calling the Looker API and getting our name from the user object. And so we can see here that this is taking control of the screen right under the Looker nav bar all the way to the bottom. And let's dive into the code. This is the repo that we cloned, and as a template, it's coming with some pretty important initial configurations. So inside of the package JSON, it's including all of the dependencies that we'll need. Here we're already making use of the SDK. It also has our Embed Sdk as well as the Extension Sdk. And then there are some important configurations here inside of Webpack, especially around the use of headers. So you'll want to use this as a starting point, or at least reference how we've laid this out if you're constructing an application from scratch. So typical layout of a React app up here. And so our index is the root. The code really starts in app.js. And this is where we're importing our extension SDK, one specifically for React. So we import these, and down in our JSX, you can see this very important tag here. This is invoking our extension provider, and it's going to include really a proxy client that's able to get context for the API and allow us to do all the stuff we're going to make use of throughout the demo. So let's proceed on to our Hello World component, where we're actually performing the API call. Inside of the Hello World component, this is where we'll be doing most of our work. We start with a couple of imports up at the top. Again, getting the extension context, as well as Looker components that are going to give us access to a library of UI components that we can reuse. So what we do is initialize the SDK at the beginning of the page when it loads. And so we can do that through React hooks. And so this is going to happen on page load. We will initialize the SDK. So you can see here that's our 4.0 SDK, which is being created through our extension context. So that's how we're able to call the API as the logged in user from the browser. When we do that, you can see here that that's where we're setting our message. It's going into a state variable, and then we're ultimately passing it down into the JSX here. Where to begin our customizations? So we want to show our best users by region, and I've already got a query inside of Looker that does this. I think we could embed it and use its visualization. I can come over here and see that visualization. We'll use this info, and what we're going to need to embed this back in our code is access to our Embed Sdk. So it's already been installed in the template repo. We just need to import it. All right. And in order to provide this certain attributes of information, we're going to need to pull the extension SDK out of the extension context. We'll see how we use that in a moment. And now with that, we can go ahead and place the iframe in the actual JSX or the HTML. I'll start with something as simple as a div. And we're going to need a callback that the SDK can hook into. And so we'll supply a ref. We'll come back in and fill this in a moment. We're not providing much style here, so it's going to be placed a little arbitrarily on the page, but we'll come back and clean that up further in the example. So we need to create the callback function itself. So I'll just say const. I'll give it a good name, something like embed container ref. That seems good to me. And we're going to use the callback function in React. And we want it to load right when the page is finished. And that's going to be this, if you're familiar with the React hooks syntax. And we're going to need to pass it an anonymous function. Okay, and it's going to get the div, like the div will be placed into this, and then the code here is going to be adding child elements. And we'll use the Looker Embed Sdk to do that. So what we need to start is really the init call. Okay, that's the first function that we would grab. Now, I need to pass in a host URL. You can see that there in the IntelliSense is our first argument it's going to ask for. How do I get that? Well, let's create a little variable. And this is where we can ask that extension SDK that we imported for some context. So it's got the looker host data, and the host URL is right inside. So now with that, we place it into our init, and we have an Embed Sdk session. So the next thing is that we would actually build the object in question. And we have really good methods inside of the SDK. Let me find them here. For creating a dashboard with an ID. So you could do something like just create dashboard with ID 5. That's great. We're doing something a little more advanced. We're going to use an explore URL. So I'll do create explore with URL, and let's go grab that URL I just showed you. Now, we're close with this string, but I happen to know just a couple of things that need to be transformed here. So we don't want these arguments, and you can find this kind of info in our documentation. Finally, we'll need to grab these additional parameters that are really a nuance of the long form URL being called here. So we need to pass an embed domain. This is just handled when you embed a simple dashboard. With these parameters, we're good. We might also, coding best practices here, go ahead and parameterize our host. And last change here is if you embed an explore, the whole explore will come through. Instead, I would like to just show the query, and that's going to focus in on the visualization, and then it needs to be on an embed path. And this looks good to me. So we could obviously parameterize that query ID. That's how some things will be working as we continue. And then finally, we need to call a couple of functions here that are going to wrap this up. So what we want to do is actually append to the element that we passed in, which is that div. And finally, there is a dot build. These are just kind of cleanup functions here, and dot connect that'll wrap us up here. Okay, so great. We've now got our callback function. We can provide it here. And again, sans style. This is just going to be real basic, but we're going to go see if it was able to come through. We have hot reload turned on, but sometimes I refresh the page here. We see our API code that was returning me, and we see our embedded query. So that's how fast it is to use the Embed Sdk to start adding some customization. So next, we'll look at using the API to pull in a little bit of info about what are the available states. And now for the API. We've already imported our API SDK. You can see here where we did the call to get the username. And so this is going to be very easy to switch this to return some data. I'd like to pull back a list of states or geos to be able to create an interactive UI element that's going to change what we're embedding. So we'll start off by just getting some data on the page. I can change this. We won't need the message anymore, so I'll create a getter and a variable and a setter for our kind of geo. There we go. And with that, I am now going to change this API call to run inline query. And you can see all of our other SDK methods here. This will return data straight away. I'll give this variable a better name. And I am going to fill out the JSON. With this API query now, we are going to pull back simple JSON. And I've chosen to have the database do alphabetic sorting so that our UI looks better. Oftentimes you'll have the choice of having the database do the work, or Looker do the work, or your client side. And in this case, I think it's easy enough for the database to do. So now with this data, let's go ahead and set it in our state variable. We're going to just do something really simple like list items for now. And with this, we can now take our geos and place it down below. In the case of our message variable, it no longer exists. So maybe we could just place it right in there, and we'll need to make it an ordered list. And we can go check out what this looks like in the Looker UI. Perfect. So we've just gotten our elements here quick and dirty. Now we're going to apply some Looker UI components and get this user interface looking how we want. We've fast forwarded just a bit, and I have brought in more Looker components. This was already imported, but I've brought in a couple of extra tags that we can use, and that's provided us with some better structure for the page. You can see interactive code examples on components.looker.com if you'd like to learn a little more about how to use these. But let's flip over here and we can see how the UI is progressing. We've got our list of states from the API, and what I'd like to do next is on click, I would like to have this change what's being shown inside of the iframe. So we'll wire up a little bit of interactivity next. I've made a couple of changes to add some interactivity. Let me walk you through. So what we did is take each one of our tree items where we're inserting the list of states, and I've registered an on-click callback that's going to change the state on the page. And when it does that, it's going to set the state variable, which is going to, in turn, retrieve a new query ID from the Looker API. So we've generated this function, which is then going to take the state, and then it will create query, which will return a client ID, and that is what you see inside of the Explore URL. Then what I've done is also added a state variable for it. So when the query ID changes, now we have our embed container is listening to query ID changes and passing it into that URL that we had created before. So what's the net effect? If we come over to our extension, we can now see that if we click on a state, it is now going to the Looker API, retrieving a new query ID and passing it into the embedded Explore, or the embedded query rather. And we see our results. So we've got the basic interactivity, and what we're going to do next is just fast forward through some UI changes, and I'll walk you through those. Okay, fast forwarding through some changes, we have added a little more structure to the page with some additional components. And I've added inline styles to make the look and feel nicer. Lastly, I've added a toggle switch here, and that's going to allow us to switch between total volume and total profit as our measure on the map. Coming up here, what we'll see is also that when the state changes from a user clicking our little tree, this is now going to use our SDK to update the filters that are active on the Explorer or the query. And this is going to run asynchronously, and it'll make our UI a little snappier. And then finally, when our toggle switch changes, I added a global state variable. This will recycle the query ID. And as we see here, where it gets the query ID, it's going to toggle between these two fields in Looker and return the result. So let's take a look at how the finished product has come along. So this is running asynchronously with a filter update. Okay, and let's switch to order profit. All right, I think this is ready to push to production. And now to deploy. So I, just a moment ago, went to the location here and then just downloaded my JavaScript file just through a right-click Save As, and then I dragged and dropped it here into my project. So I've got our compiled bundle file, and so we'll need to change what our app is pointing to. And I can also remove that me entitlement, which we no longer need. And this is ready to push to production. Okay, we're ready to exit developer mode. We can come to our extension. It's now serving from our static bundle file, and it's ready for our users to come in and enjoy. So we've seen how we're able to start from a template, really quickly make some changes, plan out the kind of custom interactivity we want, and deploy something with no outside infrastructure.
All right, well, I hope you enjoyed the demo. All the resources we used, the template repo that we cloned, as well as the application that we created, will be made available in the join links. If you want to learn a little more about the extension framework and stay up to date with the latest, go to looker.com/powered by Looker. Thanks for watching all the way through to the end, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon.